Morning. So today I want to talk about a bit of a, I don't know if it's a debate, it's an ongoing discussion that's been prevalent in academia for forever. When you're discussing the idea of social structure, and who has power and what kind of power and how that power is wielded. And then specifically when this discussion talks about gender relationships between, well, typically men and women, power dynamics, right? Now, the term patriarchy is thrown around to roughly mean any system where men seem to have most of the decision making in terms of allocation of resources and power wielding. From this, it can be, in my opinion, wrongfully concluded that society is built by men. Civilization is built by men. And I actually think this is completely backwards. I think that society is built by women. And I actually think that technology is making it less so. Now, that is, of course, a counter argument to the standard narrative. Like birth control is technology, birth control lets women control more or less when they get pregnant and with by whom. But ultimately, a society and a civilization, the outcome is going to be determined by sexual access. Women control men through sex. It's really that simple. The single biggest motivator in a man's life is sex. Now, I think there's this kind of myth that the default state of man is industriousness. I actually think nothing could be further from the truth. If you put 5 to 10 men on an island and it has all of the resources they need to survive, fruit, fish, maybe some other meat, other animals that are good eating, enough wood for fire, they'll just hang out. They'll go swimming, they'll go fishing, they'll go hunting, they'll whittle things out of wood out of amusement. But once the general functionality of their camp or whatever it is built, it'll be naturally egalitarian. The only time it'll fall into a hierarchy is when there's critical decision making or critical impacts on the group, right? If they're running low on food, the fish disappear, they overhunt the island, or they haven't collected water. Okay, then you're going to have a leadership dynamic established again, either through brute force or through intelligent delegation. Okay, but men don't actually naturally desire the hierarchy we often assume they live under. Okay, until women enter the equation. The motivation for the hierarchy is access to women. Now, this is why women are the ones who determine what civilization looks like. So, if women demand roughly monogamy, you will have egalitarianism. If women give in to the natural tendency to hypergamy, you will have harems of women and an insane hierarchy of men. if women choose a roughly egalitarian sexual access dynamic, they will demand a lot out of all men for that access. What I mean by that is, in order for a man to secure his own sexual access, he's going to have to provide a house, he's going to have to provide food, he's going to have to provide some sort of protection for like 40, 50 or more years, especially when there's kids involved, especially if he wants to have his own children. Okay? These are by no accident, these are the civilizations that we say thrive. And by no accident, they happen to be typically European or European derived. And even the societies where that are thriving today that are not Christian European derived, such as Japan, adopted the one main thing that all civilizations throughout history have noted that was unique about Western Europe was the relative egalitarianism and monogamous sexual access dynamic. Why is it that the peasants of Europe built their own houses? Monogamy. So when feminists talk about female power, they often quote these insane outliers of queen bee models, right? Well, that's only power for one woman. That's the harem equivalent with a woman at top. And I mean, I'm not saying that Queen Elizabeth the First had harems of men, but she did have an army of men who were willing to do her work. She didn't need sexual gratification from them. She got usefulness out of them. They built ships. They built navies, armies, engineering, canals. They went out and administered the colonies to ensure there was a dependable flow of raw resources, so on and so forth, right? This is why, this is the burden that women inherit. And this is why when societies collapse, when highly functional societies start to collapse, it's almost always blamed on women. It's almost always blamed on women lowering their standards. And that's actually counterintuitive because it's actually women raising their sexual standards, but lowering their sexual access demand standards. That's what we are going through right now. Highly functional societies, highly egalitarian societies, seek to destroy hypergamy. They seek to tell young girls, you're not allowed to pursue the man of your sexual fantasy. He's out of your reach. And even if you do secure him for sex, he'll just use you for sex. And they place a high cost on that risk. And through things like religion and education, they formally rewire young women's brains such that they become attracted to men who build them a house, right? It becomes cute, or it's like, yeah, you can rewire human brains. We are not doomed to gratify our most base urges at all times. And likewise, on the male side, I mean, Western Christianity is the only society in all of history that have said, by the way, chastity in young men is also um, demanded or at least encouraged. Okay, you go to the Muslim world, and there's no expectations placed on men whatsoever. And you just have this insane unequal dynamic where the men with a lot of self control become the 1%, and they have dozens of wives sometimes. And the men with no self control are, poorly paid laborers who, at best, might be able to hire a prostitute a couple of times. So why is Western civilization collapsing? Well, because we stopped that social programming. Sexual liberation. Well, first things first. It's it's amazing to me the myth of modern feminism that says something like in the 1960s, women gained access to birth control, therefore the and legal abortion, therefore the social sting of getting accidentally pregnant liberated women from the bonds of their biology. Of course, that's functionally true. But what women don't seem to understand is men were also liberated from that. The vast, vast majority of men have not been running around having a good time with a lot of women and then forced to settle down and marry one. That's just not the story. Right? That's Prince Harry. That's Nepo baby trust fund kid. Most men throughout history had access to sex outside of marriage via prostitutes only, or within marriage monogamously. So in 1960, women decided to throw out the social contract. And those who didn't want to didn't have a choice because the women who were sexually active debased the value of the currency and made it harder for the women who wanted to leverage sexual access for her husband, right? The result being that once you decouple sexual access with marriage commitments, a tiny percentage of men get even more sexual access, and women become inherently dissatisfied. And what happens? Well, pretty soon you have this new social reality where a lot of women don't seem to understand that by throwing out the social contract, they've also thrown out the social leverage they used to have through sex. So they have sex with a man outside of a marriage commitment setting or expectation, and they still think that they should have the leverage that used to give them, right? It used to be assumed that if a man was having sex with you, you could guilt trip him into committing to you. And if he was unwilling, then there was a father or an uncle or a brother who would drag him into marriage, especially if there was, a pregnancy involved. Women threw that out the window. Men didn't throw that out the window. Women threw that out of the window. So now, if you're a woman and you're having a sex with a man outside of marriage, you have to understand that that man has no obligation to you whatsoever beyond that encounter. It's still very dangerous for women. So the feminists of the 60s said things like, marriage is a Western patriarchal institution. There's nothing patriarchal about monogamous egalitarian marriage society. Patriarchy is the Middle East, where it's winner take all with a harem. That's patriarchy. Monogamous marriage society is literally egalitarianism in the interest of female security outside of a society where women have access to birth control. So where we're at now, where are we going? Well, there's a very hard decision to be made. If women decide that an attractive man is a man who's smooth at the club and has 100 other women on the go, well, what do you think society's going to look like? The men who are still stuck in the old assumption, which is like, I'm going to build you a house to prove that I am a good husband and would be a good father to your children. One day they're going to sit there with their house that they put years of labor into either physically building themselves or they worked 12-hour days to pay for. They're going to be sitting there with this house, they're going to be in their late 20s or 30s or mid 30s or 40s, and they're going to be like, well, where are these women who were looking for a husband and a father? And then they're going to see that these women are hanging off the arm of the same man who didn't do that stuff. And those men are going to be like, oh, I guess that's not what women want. I guess I have to go learn how to dance and be smooth and buy drinks and whatever. And guess what will happen to civilization when that occurs? It will crumble. It's going to crumble. And when we say it's going to crumble, it's not going to be like dystopia where the buildings stop working. It's going to look like the Middle East, where rich people have very, very, very nice buildings and boats, and poor people don't. Because the men are going to stop trying. Because at some point they're just going to be like, well, I'm not physically attractive, and I'm not tall, and I didn't inherit a trust fund, and I can't even build a house with my own sweat, blood, and tears to earn a wife. So I guess I'm just a loser. Which is exactly what the rich men want. So in short, society and civilization is built by women via men, but women have always determined what men's behavior looks like. And they always will. And we have a model for every single kind of society based on what the women demand of the men. So we're kind of at a crossroads here. And now listen, like when I'm saying monogamy in a modern setting, I mean monogamish. I think most people realize, like for life expectancy alone, we're probably not going to pair bond mate for 60 years into the future as an average. Some people will still do that, and most of them are going to be successful, by the way. But, one at a time is kind of healthy. Not just because of the pregnancy and the STIs and the emotional baggage, but because that's how you build or pay for a house. That's how you have kids with an 18-year window of relative security to maximize their talents and potential, right? Um, Now, do I think it's going to actually get as bad as the Middle East? No, because I'm 39, I'm pair bonded, I have 2 kids. We are monogamous since we met. All indications are that, we're going to make it at least to our kids' adulthood, and then we're in our 60s. So, like, why would you, unless there's something seriously wrong, like, that's an incredibly dumb decision to leave a functioning relationship once you're over the age of 50, especially for the women. Um, and I'm already seeing how much further ahead we are getting compared to our sexy single friends, right? Two incomes, emotional support, even keeledness, right? I'm not wasting any of my energy on these extraneous, stupid dating games. She's not like wasting any of her emotional energy sifting through the minefield of male attention. Um, so like come 50, we're just gonna be simply richer and more mentally sane than our sexy single friends. Now I know people are gonna say, "Oh, uh, marriage and kids can also be stressful and be less free than being single." I mean, sure, in the short term. I really think the people who think that they'll be okay renting in a city their entire life, I think they are insanely delusional. Because the older you get, no matter who you are, the older you get, the smaller your social circles become. It doesn't matter who you are. When you're 60 years old, you're not cool. The young people will have nothing to do with you. If you're rich as a man in your 60s, you can still pull 30-year-old women. Doesn't work the other way around. But even if, as a 60-year-old man, if you have that 30-year-old woman, you're not going to be hanging out with her peer group. It'll just be her using you for whatever she gets out of you, and that's it, right? Most men by the age of 60 have like one real friend, male friend, and if they're lucky, a lot have zero. They've either died or just drifted apart. But you just, as a man, you just become more solitary the older you get, right? Old men die alone fishing on a boat. Women's desire for social community never dies with age, but the social circles that want to be around them grow smaller. Basically, just other older women. So when women are in their 20s, their social circles are teenagers and old people of both genders, right? Both genders want to be around 20 and 30-year-old women. That disappears. Now, if you have kids, then that is your main social circle. If you do a good job, they'll be with you till you die. But you have to see the implications of this. Well, the implications are, do you have a middle class that owns its own house? And you will not have a middle class that owns its own house as a social norm if you don't also have monogamish marriage, pair bonding. And I don't literally mean a church wedding. I just mean like the commitment, the mechanics of it. So what I would say is women choose wisely. There is a massive social implication between if you sexually reward a man who's already getting a lot of sexual reward, or if you sexually reward the man who's literally building his own house to impress you. That's civilization right there. Do you want a society of men who purchase everything, and that results in a society of a tiny percentage of men who purchase everything, including you? Or do you want a society of men who build their own houses? And I mean that not even metaphorically. Even if they're not actually doing the carpentry themselves, they're doing the electrical work on 10 houses, and another man is doing the framing for 10 houses, right? They're still building their own houses. In short, women, modern women, please understand that there is zero difference between you doing OnlyFans. There is zero difference between you being active on Tinder. There is zero difference between you being hypersexually active and being a part of the Sultan's harem in the Ottoman Empire. You're the same woman. You're a concubine. You've just been deluded into thinking otherwise by a university system, weirdly enough. If you are being, if you are shared, if you are sharing a man with other women, you are a concubine. And we know exactly what societies with concubines look like. Thanks for watching.